All right. Well, in a moment, we are going to hear a message from one of my favorite non-family members on this planet. Our student pastor, Yin Lai, is going to be sharing with us. If you don't know Yin, she came here, 12 years ago. Wow. 12 years ago as a medical student from Singapore. She got connected with Antioch and has been just such a faithful servant of this church and is heavily invested in so many ways in this church. And she has really embodied what it means to live the Christian walk in community, to pursue continual inner transformation and always moving towards Christ-likeness and living on mission. And even once she graduated as a doctor and became a GP, she chose to, alongside that, step in and serve this church even more by leading our student ministry. And God has really used her and gifted her as a leader, but also as a teacher. And so she's going to be sharing with us and continuing our series as we go through the book of Daniel. But before she comes up, we want to focus our attention on what God's word has to say for us this morning. And so I'm going to invite Heidi up, who is going to read our scripture for us. Come on up, Heidi.
The scripture reading for today comes from Daniel, chapter 6, verses 1 to 23. It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. The satraps were made accountable to them, so that the king might not suffer loss. Now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, "We will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God." So these administrators and satraps went as a group to the king and said, May King Darius live forever. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, your majesty, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered, in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. So King Darius put the decree in writing. Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened towards Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or human being, except to you, your majesty, will be thrown into a lion's den? The king answered, The decree stands, in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. Then they said to the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, your majesty, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day. When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. Then the men went as a group to King Darius and said to him, Remember, your majesty, that according to the law of Medes and Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you. A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" Daniel answered, "May the king live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty." The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks, Heidi. Now, for most of us, this is one of the most familiar stories in the Bible, right? And as we continue in our series, Life in Exile, I want to have a look at the story again, because I believe it has one of the keys for how we can stay faithful to God, even when faced with enormous pressures to do something different. Now, Daniel is a very special book in my life because I grew up with one. My younger brother's name is Daniel. Now, my brother says every time I get a microphone, I somehow embarrass him, but I prefer to think this is just me doing my job as an excellent older sister. So today, to kick us off, I'm going to show you Daniel's drawings of Daniel in the lion's den. Don't worry, I did get his permission to show you this, but it is very important to him that you know he did this when he was 8 years old. Notice that it says page 12, so if this art speaks to you, let me know. I have connections with the artist. But this is what we think about when we think about Daniel in the lion's den, isn't it? Daniel standing or sitting on one side, looking very thoughtful, and then strangely friendly lions on the other side. The scene looks almost peaceful. But if you actually think about the content of this story, really, it's more appropriate to be an intense action film. This story is about an innocent man who was targeted by powerful people. This is about a corrupt system wanting to destroy him, leading to a death sentence with lions waiting for him at the bottom of a pit. If you ask me, this is rated 15 or over at least. This is not a children's fairy tale. My parents named my brother Daniel because Daniel in the Bible trusted God no matter what his circumstances were. His confidence was ultimately not in himself or his abilities, but in God. And we see this time and time again in the scriptures. Daniel excelled in a foreign land whilst courageously never compromising his own faith. Now, whether your name is Daniel or not, isn't that a nice way to be described? At some point in our lives, we ask ourselves this question: would I have the courage to stand when pressure arises? Courage is something we all desire. We want to know that we're somebody who is faithful under pressure, stands up for what we say we believe in, has courage when it matters. Because we know there will be lions in our lives. Now, we might not be facing real lions in literal Babylon, but every day we have the choice to either choose to follow Jesus or drift away in a culture that often points us away from Jesus. Your lions today may look like staying silent when somebody mocks your faith. It could be compromising your integrity because that's what everybody else does. It could be putting your identity in your career, what other people think of you, your achievements. It could be drifting away from God because the distractions of our lives have become bigger than his voice. So it's natural to ask this question: would I have the courage to stand when pressure arises? But I think in Daniel 6, it actually gives us the key to an even better question. How do I become the person with courage to stand when pressure arises? How do I do it? So as we go into Daniel 6, it's important to know that Daniel here is not a young man. So when we picture Daniel in the lion's den, we imagine a young and strong man in the pit full of lions. Daniel's actually about 80 to 85 years old here. He has spent his entire adult life in exile in Babylon. He has seen rise and falls of kingdoms, and at this point, he has served under at least 5 different kings. That's 5 different leaders, 5 different political climates, 5 different governments. And as we pick up the story here, in the previous government, Daniel was one of the 3 administrators who are in charge of 120 regional governors, or what they call satraps at the time. Now, this new king, King Darius, takes over, and this is where we pick up the story in verse 3. Now, Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and satraps, the regional governors, by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. Daniel was excellent at his job. Daniel could balance this tension of cooperating with the culture of Babylon whilst not compromising his own faith. He worked with integrity and he earned trust. But that's where the conflict happens. The other administrators were jealous and they wanted him removed. So what did they do? They investigated his life, all his decisions, his politics, his character. And what did they find on Daniel? Nothing. Daniel is one of the highest ranking officials in this government, with power over the entire kingdom. And they could not find any corruption or negligence in this man. This is a display of pure integrity in someone with immense power. How rare is that? So the only conclusion they could come to was, we will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God. They could not attack Daniel's character or his work. They could only attack his worship. So the officials went to King Darius and convinced him to sign this irreversible decree that for 30 days, the people could not pray or worship anybody else but the king. Anyone who disobeyed this decree was thrown in the lion's den. And what was Daniel's reaction? Let's look at verse 10. Now, when Daniel learned that the decree has been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows were open towards Jerusalem. 3 times a day, he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. I think this is one of the most remarkable verses of this whole chapter. Daniel knows about the decree. You don't have to be as clever as Daniel to know. There are consequences. There is a den full of lions, hungry. And what's mind-blowing to me is that Daniel hears about this, goes home to pray, and he opens his windows. Now, I like to think that if I were in Daniel's shoes, nothing would stop me from praying. But I would certainly close my windows, right? And not only that, he went home and opened those windows. He gives thanks. Again, if I was in Daniel's shoes, my windows would be closed. And really, I'll be petitioning. I wouldn't be giving thanks. I'll be saying, Lord, you know what King Darius did? Can you do something? What do I do now? Daniel's faith is not shaken by his circumstances. And I think that just shows his incredible spiritual maturity. So reading this verse, I just can't help but ask, how is Daniel doing any of this Why is Daniel so different? I think the key to my question here is found at the last bit of this very verse. Just as he had done before. Remember, Daniel is 80 years old here. That means for decades, he prayed 3 times a day, every day. Let's pause here for a second. We've just said Daniel is one of the highest ranking officials in charge of an entire kingdom. I bet his schedule was packed. His responsibilities enormous. And yet, 3 times a day, he intentionally interrupted his work to meet God. Daniel was Daniel by his bedroom window before he was Daniel in the lion's den. Daniel's prayer life didn't start at the lion's den. Daniel's prayer life was forming him for decades to be someone who could trust God. Every day when he turned towards Jerusalem, he was reminding himself of his true citizenship, his true king, and ultimately, who he truly was. Prayer didn't remove Daniel from Babylon, but prayer reminded him who Babylon's king truly was. Now, Daniel's faithfulness was so evident that even the pagan King Darius noticed it as he was being lowered into the lion's den. This is what King Darius said: "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." Even Darius saw Daniel's faithfulness. So as Daniel was being led to the lion's den, we have to remember this is a tense moment. We know the ending of this story. King Darius and Daniel do not. At this moment, Daniel was a man being led to a certain horrible and painful death. To illustrate this, many, many years ago when I was a kid, my parents brought me overseas and we went to a zoo. And it was the lion feeding time, believe it or not. I remember this really clearly because in the lion's enclosure, there was a lion that was just circling really hungrily, and these lions were growling enthusiastically because on top of the ledge with the zookeepers, there was a live goat standing there, ready to be lion's feed. And I remember this poor goat crying the whole way with all the enthusiastic growls from the lions underneath. And I remember the adult zoo patrons were just vehemently protesting what was happening there. Now imagine that, but instead of a live goat, King Darius was offering an 80-year-old man, Daniel, as lion feed. Daniel would not have lasted long in that lion's den. So when King Darius asked the next morning, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God whom you serve continually been able to rescue you from the lions?" I don't think he was expecting a response. The only logical and reasonable response here is silence. But we know how this story ends. Daniel answered, "May the king live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done anything wrong before you, your majesty." This is the climax of our story with the hero Daniel in the lion's den. Wrestle these lions or, tamed the lions or scare away the lions. Daniel didn't do anything in that den. It was the Lord who intervened. It was the Lord who shut the mouths of those lions. It was God who delivered Daniel. Now, when we have storms in our lives, when we are in our own difficult situation, I think it's quite natural to be praying, God, what do I do now? What is my next step? What is my direction? Sometimes faith requires us to do something. But here we can see sometimes faith looks like surrender. Sometimes the step of faith required of us is to choose to be still and trust in God's provision. Like Psalm 46 says, be still and know that I am God. Daniel remained still in the lion's den. Now, this is maybe an obvious observation, but it's an important one. Because when we read the stories of these great heroes of the Bible, we can leave thinking, I need to be more courageous like Daniel. But the true hero of this story is the God who delivered Daniel by shutting the mouths of the lions. So, it's fitting to end this chapter with King Darius declaring God's goodness. This is King Darius saying, I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. We started this chapter with the king issuing a decree for people to worship him and only him. Here, at the end of the chapter, that same king is telling his people to revere the God of Israel. How amazing is that? Now, it's difficult to talk about Daniel, a man who, stayed faithful under pressure, without thinking about a truer and better Daniel, Jesus. Jesus remained faithful under the greatest pressures imaginable. Like Daniel, Jesus was innocent. He was a man without sin. He was falsely accused. He was handed over by jealous leaders. He was also sealed away. But unlike Daniel, Jesus did not escape death. Instead, he willingly entered death so that we could be rescued forever. The outcomes of Jesus and Daniel's persecution might be different, but they both showed the same steadfast courage. So we started this sermon today asking this question: how do I become the person with courage to stand when pressure arises? As we look at Daniel 6, it's a surprisingly ordinary answer, and it's not found in the lion's den. Because Daniel's character was not formed in the lion's den. Daniel's character was revealed in the lion's den. I'm going to say that one more time. Daniel's character was not formed in the lion's den. Daniel's character was revealed in the lion's den. Daniel did not suddenly become courageous at the mouth of the lion's den. Daniel's courage was built on decades of having habits to become someone who trusted God. Think about an Olympic sprinter race, right? The race that we see for those few seconds, the Olympians are not trying to get better, try different techniques, learn something new. No. What we see in that race is the result of years of training, discipline, perseverance that no one else would see in full. The race that we see reveals what they have already built. It's the same for our spiritual lives. In our moments of pressure and trial, they reveal what has already been forming in us. As we said at the beginning, there will be lions in our lives. We will all face pressure, temptation, suffering, crisis. Thankfully, most of our lives are not spent in the lion's den, right? Most of our lives are ordinary days with ordinary moments, with opportunities to build our character, to prepare us for these moments of trial. The challenge is we don't know when our lions are going to show up. It could be many years later, it could be next year, next week, tomorrow. We don't know when our day of testing will come. Therefore, we must be prepared. How do we prepare? I want to go back to my favorite verse, verse 10 again. Now, when Daniel learned about the decree that had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened towards Jerusalem. 3 times a day, he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Every day, Daniel intentionally removed himself from the demands of Babylon to anchor himself in what is true. Daniel didn't start praying at the time of crisis. He already had a daily rhythm of returning to God to recenter himself, regardless of what was going on around him. In other words, prayer was Daniel's backbone, not his wishbone. Each day, as Daniel faced Jerusalem, what he was reminding himself of was Babylon is not my true home. King Darius is not my true king. My identity is not found in my success, position, or what Babylon thought of me. My identity is found in the God of Israel. As he gave thanks by the bedroom window, even in the face of death, he was choosing to fix his eyes on God's faithfulness and not on his circumstances. But most of all, Daniel kept showing up 3 times a day, day after day, year after year, decade after decade. Why? Because Daniel knew that Babylon has a way of pulling our hearts away from God. Babylon constantly tries to tell us what should matter, what we should be chasing after, what our identities should be. Every time Daniel knelt in prayer, he was resisting the story that Babylon fed him and reminding himself of God's story for him. So, we don't pray regularly. A consistent prayer life isn't about keeping God aware of our needs. A consistent prayer life keeps us aware of our need for God. You know, prayer isn't about earning brownie points with God. It's not about being more religious or proving your worth in any way. Prayer isn't about earning your access to God either. It's about enjoying the access that Jesus already won for us. So some of you here, when thinking about a consistent prayer life, some of us, our first thoughts might be, yes, that sounds good, but you don't know, my life is so busy, it's so packed. It'll be so hard to fit in more things in my life. Very real and very understandable. Or for some of us, your first thought could be, do you know what? I'm more of a free-going person. I don't really like strict, rigid structures. Doesn't work for me. I rather do spontaneous things. It just works better for me. I would like to suggest having regular habits is a part of our lives. We have noticed the importance of regular habits in other areas of our lives. For example, we know we should eat regular meals to keep our physical bodies nourished. What I'm trying to say this morning is that our souls need regular habits as well to be nourished. If we are not intentionally building regular habits to be formed by God, we will unintentionally be formed by the world around us. That is why we need built-in daily habits to bring us back to God, to help us hold on to our first love. Now, I started running regularly about a couple years back, and to be honest, it still feels pointless. Now, I know there's a lot of runners in the room, so don't get mad yet. I have a point, I promise. But I feel like this is a safe place where I can share my thoughts. Running feels pointless. I'm not getting any faster. It's horrible every single time I do it. And I still don't enjoy it in the moment. But recently, I stopped running for a couple of weeks, and I felt sluggish and unsettled at the same time. I didn't know that was possible. Old aches and pains started coming back, and only then did I realize, running was doing something that whole time. Prayer can also feel similarly. Prayer doesn't always feel spectacular, right? But over time, God uses the ordinary moments with Him to quietly shape our character. Prayer transforms us even when we don't notice. Having said that, if your prayer life is boring, don't give up, change it up. Change something in your prayer routine. Pray the Psalms or go for a prayer walk. Use a scripted or guided prayer. Change something. Even better, ask somebody. We have a whole community here, and we should be teaching and learning from each other. Ask someone whose prayer life inspires you. What do they do? What do they like? What do they not quite like? Or we have many books and resources that are aimed to build your prayer life. Because prayer shouldn't be boring. And I'm not saying that doing all these things would change your life every day, prayer will suddenly feel spectacular. No, there is something about building habits that's about putting in the work and sticking to it. But prayer should not be boring. It should be life-giving. Now, my prayer life, for many years, I do my devotional time at night, and it's quite nice to end the day with God and reflect on the day that has just happened. I'm really not a morning person. That's a really tough time for me, and every extra minute of sleep in the morning, I really, really value. But that means that when I wake up, I'm just in a rush, and my sole goal is to get to work on time. I was challenged on this a few years ago, and since then, I've set my alarm 10 minutes earlier than what I needed to. And I spent that time starting the day with prayer with God, usually a scripted or guided prayer, because my brain is not working at that hour. But I found this morning prayer has slowed me down in the mornings and also slowed me down as a person. I find that now I'm more willing to follow the pace of God rather than my own. I also found that starting the morning with Him started my day thinking about God and what was important to Him, rather than my thoughts and what other people thought of me. I'm still a work in progress, but looking back, I can see that this was one of the important ways that God has used to shape me into a less anxious, less rushed, and less caring of what other people's opinions of me are. I pray because I believe that God hears and cares for every word that I utter. I pray because it reminds me that there is a world beyond what my 2 eyes can see. I pray because He changes me. I pray because I believe my prayers are powerful and they change things. That is what gives my prayer life, because I believe my prayers have purpose. I saw a video of an interview. This guy asked this pastor, if you had 5 minutes with Jesus Christ, what would you say to Him? And the pastor, without missing a beat, said, well, you can have 5 minutes with Jesus Christ at all times. And I couldn't help but think, why am I not taking Jesus up on that invitation? Imagine how different would your life be if you had a scheduled 5-minute meeting with Jesus every day? We need regular habits of prayer to anchor us back to our true source of hope. And that anchor will build us into people of courage to face lions that show up along the way. So let me leave you with this question. What is my next step to grow in prayer? What is your next step? If you've never really prayed before, an easy start to this could be praying through Psalms 23 every day, 5 minutes. If you have a regular prayer routine, fantastic. Maybe it's about adding just one more rhythm in your life. Where in your day do you need an extra anchor to remember who God is and who you truly are? Or maybe it's about shifting focus of your prayers, starting with thanksgiving instead of going straight to the request that you need, or spending time listening to God's voice, not just doing all the talking. What is your next step to grow in prayer? Let's take one concrete step today, because habits that we build in today's ordinary moments prepare us for tomorrow's crisis. Let me pray for you. So, Father, thank you for showing us through Daniel what it looks like to trust you in the middle of pressure, in the middle of uncertainty and trial. Lord, make us a people of courage to be able to stand against the challenges of this world. Help us build daily rhythms in our lives to bring us back to you. We thank you that because of Jesus, we have direct access to you. Teach us to pray. Help each of us here take one next step in prayer this week. Help our prayer lives come alive again. In Jesus' name, amen. We're going to end our time together this morning with a song of worship. And I want to invite you to use this time to anchor yourselves back to the realities of God's kingdom. But maybe today you feel like you are in your own lion's den, your own difficult, impossible situation. I want to say you don't have to carry that alone today. We would love to pray alongside you, and there'll be a prayer team on the side over here after the service. Please come for prayer. But at this moment, would you be willing to follow in Daniel's example and choose to fix your eyes on God? Would you be willing to choose to look at God's faithfulness no matter the circumstances? Let us stand and let us worship together.